See, we always got to sit around and make sure the goddamn thing works because, we could have been on live all this time and we never know. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome, or afternoon or the morning, wherever you are. I want you to know that we love you and we thank you for joining us right here on the Yellkaos program. Before we get started, I want to remind you to look for me on your favorite social media. I'm not going to put the links because the YouTube algorithm will nix my video and no one will ever see it if you link to anything aside from YouTube. So it's not that hard. Yellkaos. Go ahead and look for me. You can find me on your Facebook. I'm not going on Twitter because the fucking president's there all the time and there's just no room left. Do that Instagram thing because I like to take photos of strange things and make you look at them. So that's great. Also looking for me on Anchor, the podcasting app. That's not really a podcasting app, but I like it anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Arcade Story. We're going to talk with a very good friend of mine, a guy, my brother from another state, Mr. EDT1138. Hey, that worked out kind of nicely. Yes,
yeah, it did.
Yeah. Thank you very much for being here. I'm going to pry into your personal life and exploit your collection for a little while. And sure. I hope we have a nice talk because what we're going to talk about today, after we have the bland pleasantries and, oh, how have you been? And, oh, I love that shirt and all these things. What we're going to do is we're going to lay something out for the collectors that are left in my audience. I don't know that if I have that many collectors left, but we were talking about right before the program began that a lot of people who get into video game collecting, console collecting, PC game collecting, or whatever, a lot of people that I talk to have this notion that they're going to graduate to a higher form of collecting. Some people, they want to collect everything in box. Some people want to collect sealed in box. Those people are fucking nuts because that's not video games. That's plastic wrapped cardboard boxes that are just kind of heavy. You can't actually use them. But then I've heard people that want to graduate to arcades. They want to have this board and that board, and they want to have a whole lineup of things along the wall. Mind you, they're living in their mother's house in a spare bedroom, but they're going to have a whole wall of arcades. So I want to help those people out and understand the real amounts, what is involved, not just the cost, because the money is the easy part. Actually making room for these things in your lives and having a lifestyle that will support it. That's something you have to take into account. Now, Ed over here, Ed's crazy, because he admits it, and that's what's important. The first step to rectifying your problem is identifying it and admitting it. And I thank you, Eddie, for letting us share in some of your pain, so that way, you'll feel better and we won't feel as worse. Is that good grammar? I don't know. Anyway,
it worked.
Yeah, Eddie, you've been away from YouTube for a little while.
I have been.
And why is that? Are you one of those people trying to keep the economy going?
I'm not sure how being away from YouTube would necessarily help that, but yes, I do have a job. I have been very busy at work. Took a promotion, and it makes finding time for anything other than family to be pretty difficult. Mm-hmm. So most of my time is involved in trying to find ways to enjoy time with my kids, my wife, brother, sister, mother. Just, life got busier for me and I had less time for my leisure activity. And when you start going down the list of things that you really enjoy doing, editing videos was not at the top of mind, surprisingly.
No, it's not a lot of fun, is it?
Well, not for me. I know lots of people enjoy it. My brother Jim thoroughly enjoys the process of recording and editing and even little special effects. He enjoys that. I've never enjoyed that. So that was not something that was going to keep me coming back to YouTube.
Absolutely. It seems that there's just an enormous amount of money and resources being poured into these videos that some of them get views, some of them don't. And it's time of your life where, that's what it came down to for me, especially, is that I'm spending time editing videos when I should be playing these goddamn games that I bought.
Well, I find the older I get, the more I measure the value of something based on the amount of time it takes me to achieve it.
Sure.
So if I'm not thoroughly enjoying whatever I'm spending time on, I'm counting the pennies as time ticks off the clock. So it really makes it difficult to enjoy stuff like that.
Yeah, but I think we have the advantage of, it seems like, being aware of that at an earlier age than people who are, wait until much later in life to recognize that life passed them by. Don't be one of those people.
Yeah, try not to regret
telling
the
you.
things you didn't do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a whole bunch of people that lived without regret, and now they call them stumpy. But, you know, that's for another game and another time. Anyway, we got all sorts of nice people leaving all sorts of comments over in there. So if we don't keep up with your if we don't keep up with your comments, I'm terribly sorry. Please drop it in again, and we'll try and get your questions answered. There's a lot of questions about why I'm showing pornography. That's none of your business, young man. So
Gamera
anyway,
is not pornography.
No, absolutely not. No, this is not Gamera. This is War of the Monsters. It's in the public domain, which is why I'm allowed
I saw
to show
Gamera
it.
in there. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Public domain, not
Big
Gamera.
Toto Monster. Big Toto Monster. Yes, because Gamera costs money. And but anyway, but I want to say that I have missed your content, but I understand. And you know, you can always go back and do you get a lot of people? I need to ask this of you. Do you get a lot of people go back and look at your old material and bitch that you're not making content like it?
No, actually, and I'm sure it's the YouTube algorithms. Because as time has gone by, I've gotten fewer. Like I used to get comments on old videos all the time. Even years after I had stopped making content. And then over like the last year, it is completely stopped. Like I will get a very specific comment on a very specific video, and it's usually one of the how-to videos that I posted, where somebody will come in and they'll ask a question, or they'll say thank you for doing that. But even those have come more and more seldom. So I'm pretty sure it's YouTube, just since I'm not making content, slowly pushing the content to the bottom of the list. So yeah, not really, not anymore. Used to all the time.
Well, what's interesting for me is, and again, they keep changing YouTube and the way it works and all the different formats and the inbox systems, which we used to have inboxes, and now we do.
Yeah,
but
is there still one?
Yes, but it's buried deep within the creator studio, so you have to like really seek to find it. The notifications don't notify you of anything except for somebody put up a video and you don't even remember that you subscribed to them. And so
I don't use notifications for that. I've always gone directly to my subscription page.
Oh, as do
and I can't think. People say all the time that you won't see their videos in your subscription feeds. I've never had somebody's video not show up.
Well, and the other one that gets me is when you subscribe, you have to click the bell. It's like, well, if I've subscribed, why do I need to further subscribe?
I've never clicked a bell. Never
in my life. And yeah. You know, I mean, there's all sorts of filthy jokes that can be made right there, but I don't think we need to go into that. With that having been said, that was filthy. Anyway, every once in a while, I'll get a landslide of commentary from videos from way back when, you know, back when I was a much younger and, shall we say, corpulent individual. And a lot of it is me not making any sense, but since I was all pissed off, I guess it made sense to those people. And I appreciate that. I really do. But if I'm, you know, it doesn't work. And that's the real problem, is that apparently YouTube runs by commentary, but they keep scaling back ways for the connection to really take place. And I think you could probably...
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, and if you want to have a discussion about free speech, I think you could say some things similarly. But that's neither here nor there. That doesn't affect video games. But that brings me right around to the content and the things that you've really shown. How did the collecting begin for you?
Honestly, at first, like with a lot of people, it was just about wanting to collect the things that I had when I was a kid. Like, I owned the Atari 2600. I had it like 3 or 4 years, probably 4 years after it came out. My older brother and I owned it. And I just have very fond memories because that was the idea that we had. I could play Pac-Man at home, for instance. And even though that's a terrible version of Pac-Man, it was in your house. And I didn't have to go and plunk quarters in at the local burger chef to play the game. So I remember getting that in the house for the first time. Our uncle bought it for us as a family gift. And we played the crap out of it. And then later on, I had the Sega Master System and the Sega Genesis. And it was after my father died, so we didn't have a lot of money. And the fact that my mom went out of her way to get us stuff that was fairly expensive, we really appreciated it. And we didn't have a lot of games for any of the systems that we had. but we played the crap out of it. And that was really our only source of entertainment at home. We didn't have cable. We didn't have a VCR. We had video games and we had books. And while I read tons and tons of books, it's much easier to plunk down after school and play a video game or watch the same episode of Scooby-Doo's Movie Mysteries for, the 50th time than it is to sit down and read a book when you just want to relax. So when I started collecting, it was just about collecting what I had before, which is the same thing a lot of people say. But then I had the Atari 2600 and I had the Sega Master System and the Sega Genesis. And then I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to collect the systems that my brothers had. My brother Jim, second youngest, had the NES and the Super Nintendo. So I, picked those up as I found them. And then my youngest brother, wow, that was not a good sound. My youngest brother, Andy, had the Nintendo 64. And I thought, I'll pick up the Nintendo 64. I really didn't. I was too old really to enjoy it at the time. But I enjoyed it after the fact much more as an adult, sort of going back and bathing myself in the nostalgia of it. So that's how I started collecting. And then it just sort of ballooned from there because I was traveling for work a lot and I would see this old system sitting in a Goodwill or sitting in a flea market, or sometimes it would be like somebody's entire collection of systems. And that's really what drew me, was the actual hardware. The systems are what really appealed to me. The idea of getting this piece of technology from the 70s or the 80s and making it work again. And so yeah, anyway, I just kept finding the things, picking them up for a few dollars. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. And then I started, I've always been a tinker, and I started working on them. And really the hobby became for me more about just the act of getting the hardware and making it work and seeing what was inside it and figuring out what all the individual pieces did and how they work together. And then that translated into computers for me in the late 90s, and I started tinkering with computers. And so not to get too far ahead of myself, but eventually that worked into the idea of I wanted to build my own arcade cabinet. And I'm having some serious lag issues, so I'm going to close this window here. But yeah, for me, it started out as collecting from the standpoint of nostalgia, wanting to have the systems when I was a kid, and then it just sort of grew into collecting anything that I found cheap.
Oh well, that's a slippery slope. That's something really easy to fall into. I know that myself. Now, so is the first arcade the one that you built? Is that the first one you brought into your collection?
The first one that I brought into my collection was actually a MAME cabinet, and it was something that I decided I wanted to do with my son, with Lance. I was like, hey, I want to share this part of my childhood with my son, and I thought the best way to do it would actually be to go out and like build my own cabinet and then install MAME on a computer, put it in there, and build from scratch. And then I started looking and noticing that there were old arcade cabinets on well, Craigslist, I don't think is where I think I found my first cabinet on eBay. I noticed that they were selling them cheap, and I bought an old Mortal Kombat cabinet from Midway, but it wasn't. It had Mortal Kombat ripped out of it, and I think it was Tekken 4 put in it. And so I didn't really feel bad about taking the guts out of it and repurposing it as a MAME cabinet, because it had already been sort of scavenged and had something else put into it. So I think it was $225, and it was from a someplace in Cleveland, and they delivered it to me for $50. So it was $275 delivered, and then I sold the guts out of it for I think $275. So it was essentially free, and that was my way of getting into the hobby real cheap. Mm-hmm. And then over the next few years, I decided I was going to make YouTube videos, and that's how I got onto YouTube, was posting videos of me working on the arcade cabinet. But that was my first cabinet, and I did it really as a project with my son so that we'd have something to work on, and I could share a piece of my childhood that you really don't see anymore. There really aren't any arcade cabinets around where we live, and he hadn't had an opportunity to experience them yet.
That's quite interesting. And I have to know, I mean, you ultimately put a MAME system in it, right? Yeah. And how did you do that? Did you decide you went with a PC based system, obviously?
Well, there was no Raspberry Pi at the time. Now, I will say Raspberry Pis, for somebody who wants to get into it now, this is absolutely the way to go. You have more ability to customize with a PC. There are things you can do that you can't do on the Raspberry Pi at the moment, or at least I don't know how to do it. But yeah, this is what I would do if I was going to do it today. At the time, I was going based on an article I had read in Popular Mechanics in, I want to say like 1998 or 1999. And they had written an article, and it was in the last several pages in the back of the magazine, where one of the writers was writing about a pet project he had, and it was building an arcade cabinet. And the way he did the controls, he actually took a keyboard, and rather than he didn't have special hardware to translate the key presses into buttons, so he literally made a box that he set a mechanical keyboard in. And then out of wood, he machined these mechanical buttons that would press the keys on the keyboard. And that's how he made his oops, that was bad. That's how he made his control panel for his arcade machine that ran on a PC. And I had no idea that there was specialized hardware that people were making that would essentially emulate a keyboard, and then you could just wire it directly up to the old arcade controls. So when I first started building it, that was what I had in mind. This article I'd read, 9 or 10 years before. And then I started getting on the internet and reading articles and realized that there were far easier ways to do it. But that was the original genesis of the idea, is this article I had read 10 years ago. So I knew it was possible. It was just a matter of figuring out how to do it.
See, that's the fascinating part of that story, is you decided this big, massive, ridiculous undertaking, I'm going to do that. And then, oh, well, this is actually much easier. So
yeah, well, originally I was going to build, like I said, the cabinet. I was going to go and, draw out a template on plywood and cut it out and assemble it myself. And then I realized I could, for just a little bit more money, buy an old cabinet and repurpose it. And then when I bought the cabinet, I had no idea the value of the components inside. So it's a very cheap hobby to get into if you're willing to be, and the same thing with video game consoles, but it's a cheap hobby to get into if you're willing to do the work. If you're willing to wait for the right deal, and then you're willing to do the work required to make it what you envisioned when you first started.
Oh, sure, absolutely. And building out custom things, especially of that nature, is an entirely more reasonable proposition, at least in my experience, than trying to shall we say, repair and restore a historic machine. It really seems...
it's a very different prospect when you go into it. Like, I have an original Zaxxon arcade machine back there that I picked up with an original Super Cobra, and I got them both for $50. The Super Cobra was non-working. The Zaxxon worked, but it had some glitches. And I approached the Zaxxon cabinet in a very different way than I approached the Super Cobra cabinet. Super Cobra cabinet was very damaged. It would have been hard to salvage it and restore it to make it look like the original Super Cobra. Where the Zaxxon, it required very little restoration work to make it look like it was still like you would imagine it would look in the arcade. So if the idea is you're going to restore it and make it look like an original cabinet, you have to be willing to spend a lot more time and a whole heck of a lot more money to get the original experience out of it. And I only did it with that one because I got it as cheap as I did. I was able to invest more money into the appearance of it. I'm one of those guys that I don't understand the form over function guys. I am more about getting maximum functionality with minimum effort. Like, I want to be able to do as much as possible with as few things as I possibly can. And when it comes to restoring stuff, whether it's a car or an arcade machine or whatever, I've always enjoyed the process of getting it into a working state and then making it work as good as it possibly can. And then I really start to lose interest after that point. And I really don't care what it looks like anymore, just as long as it's working. And that's a blind spot in my my personality, I guess, when it comes to repairing things.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's something I have to know. I really do. Did you ever consider having a pinball table?
I would love to have one. They're ridiculously expensive, and I can never find them for sale anywhere around here.
Really?
There was one 20 minutes up the road that popped up on Craigslist here probably about a month ago, and it was a I want to say a 1974 Incredible Hulk pinball table. And they only wanted, I think, $600 for it. I called the guy within 15 minutes of it being posted and it was already sold. So they almost never show up for anything like a reasonable price. And when they do, they're gone in a heartbeat.
Huh. See,
So
and
far.
that's interesting that there seems to be a big upswing in that in recent years. And it's interesting is to get into it is not all that expensive when you really look at what these things cost new. But when you take into account what they cost new, you have to account for the money. These were expected to be plow horses.
Yeah.
They were expected to be set up somewhere and to draw money for a period of years, and then you throw it away or whatever the case might be. And I am familiar. I know a handful, an inordinate amount of people who are, in fact, pinball collectors or amusement machine collectors, not necessarily arcade games, but arcade games are in that same sphere. And looking at the time, the money, the effort, the parts research invested, you may as well own a bunch of old Italian cars. It is
probably so. The few that I have looked at in person, the older, like 1970s and earlier machines, you can get them cheaper, but you have to be willing to repair the things on a fairly regular basis. And when you get inside of them, you get the chance to look underneath. They're so complicated.
They are, absolutely. That is true analog mechanical.
Yeah, I would enjoy getting in and fiddling with it once and making it work, but the idea of it constantly breaking would drive me crazy.
Absolutely. You may as well have an old Ferrari.
Yeah,
because
exactly
I'm pretty sure they're going to break down around the same amount. And it's fascinating. But not only that, is that the way that in recent years that they've accrued in value, and you begin to think, who can afford to keep doing that, to keep pumping money into these machines that are prone to fail?
You know what? I drive through fairly affluent areas all the time, and I see houses that run, $1 million plus, and there's so many of them. And I think, how are there this many people with that much money in the world? Well, it astounds me.
The question you really have to ask is, how many loans are there really?
Well, yeah, that's true.
Because I think that's really the attitude is that, well, we don't need to have an economics discussion right now. We're supposed to be talking about happy things to keep the people happy right here on the Yellkaos program. But that leads me to the big question, and it's not even pertaining to the giant screen right behind you for showing movies. I want you to how big is that screen before we get going?
That is 10 feet across.
10 feet across. My goodness. And you've had some big movie parties?
A few. We do about once a quarter. We do a themed party where we'll have like Italian dinner, and then we watch Johnny Dangerously.
Oh,
okay. We had a Mexican dinner another night, and we watched, and don't judge me, The Three Amigos.
You know that that works.
It's usually a comedy. It's usually something where, well, you know what? I won't get into that. But we do theme movie nights, and then my daughter now refuses to watch anything on anything other than the 10-foot screen.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, we've got.
Is she sat real close?
No, I think that's why she likes it, because we have a 55-inch 4K television in the family room, and she sits like 5 feet from it. But this, she gets to sit, 10, 12 feet away, and she gets the same effect.
Oh, well, that's about how the math would come across, but that's just immense. You have an overhead projector on that, I assume, mounted to the ceiling?
No, it actually sits on a shelf.
Okay.
It's about 10 feet behind me there.
Okay. And is that a primary Laserdisc screen there?
I do. I have the Laserdisc player runs through my receiver, which improves the image a little bit, and then runs it to that. But yeah, Laserdisc. And what else is over there? Like a Blu-ray player and a PC, I think. And there's a Amazon Fire Stick, I think, is on there for the kids to use.
See, everything you could ever need. The ultimate basement. I have to visit this place one of these days. I really do.
Welcome anytime.
And I appreciate that. Thank you kindly. If I ever get my ass in gear over to what's the one they have over there? The Classic Gaming or the Midwest Gaming Classic over there?
Midwest Gaming Classic. I was a little disappointed the last time I visited.
When did you go out last?
We went this last March. I think it's March, right? Yeah. And March? Yeah,
I thought
March.
they had it in April.
You know what? Maybe it wasn't April. I don't even know. It seems like a year ago, honestly. But it was in a better venue and it was in a nicer part of town. But for whatever reason, everything was spread out, I think was the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So since they had this much larger venue, I don't know, it didn't seem as intimate. When we went to it at the old venue, you sort of felt pressed in, and I don't know, I've always sort of liked feeling like I was in I don't want to go to the mother's womb, a nest, we'll say.
Well, I think it gives, like you said, a bit of intimacy, and it feels like an actual gathering as opposed to you're in a big open mall quad.
Also, everything was far more expensive.
Yeah, that seems to be the goal of a lot of the. Well, I mean, they gotta pay for those vendor spots somehow.
Well, you go in, and I think it was $4 for a 20-ounce bottle of water. I mean, it was crazy.
That's Woodstock pricing right there. My goodness.
Yeah, I know, right?
That's insanity. I mean, I guess we can really talk about that too. Is what's become of the conventions really is that they're all becoming, I don't know, by becoming more organized, they're becoming less organized, if that makes sense. You know,
well, they're certainly becoming less fun. I mean, Lance has asked to go back to it since our first visit every single year. And after we left this year, he's like, you know what? I don't really feel like I need to go back to that one. And again, it was because it was so much bigger and it didn't feel special anymore. It didn't feel like something unique. It just felt like your average comic book convention is what it felt like.
Well, that's the thing is, and they call themselves conventions when in fact what they're actually expositions. They're actually big indoor fairs designed to draw money. Whereas when I think of a convention, I always think of the guys with the Shriners with the red hats driving around the little cars. You know, like
I love the tiny little red hats. Yeah,
I love that. And those are people getting together to have a nice time from a similar walk of life, whatever have you, and being a community. And this seems more like just a fleecing operation. Similar to what it's like to go to a major league ballpark these days. I don't know if you've been lately.
I haven't been to a major league ballpark, but I did go back to Disney World with my kids a few years ago, and then again the year after. For the first time, I think I'd been there 12 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it is a vastly different experience now. I mean, you know, the rides are similar and the people are similar, but they have just they try to squeeze every last penny out of everything there. So they've monetized everything. They've monetized, you know, good picture locations. You can't just go. Like we have a picture, my wife and I, of us standing on a bridge that we took when we were there on our honeymoon. And we went back to the same spot. We were going to take a picture of the kids, and they had a line of people and a professional photographer there. And you can't get your picture taken without waiting in this 15-minute line.
Wow.
So, but if that's what you're referring to, like you go to a ball, I haven't been to a major league, any kind of sporting event in years, but I assume that it's a similar situation where every single square inch has been monetized.
Well, that's what I mean is that to suggest that that's the national pastime, yet most people you talk to have probably never, I shouldn't say most people, but a lot of people I talk to, yes, have never been to a major league ballpark or have not been to the new ballpark in their neighborhood since whenever the old ballpark was around. And it's interesting because like here in San Diego, the San Diego Padres play here. What a tough life they have. They live in San Diego and they get to hit a ball poorly and get paid a pretty decent amount of money to do it. But cities paying for these ballparks, the point I'm trying to get at is that when you walk in, just to walk in, they want $20 to put your car somewhere. And that's where the fun begins because the Peanuts and Cracker Jack are not sold together. And, you know, of course, now fly balls result in lawsuits, I guess, but that's another story. But these game conventions that are supposed to be, you know, communities coming together to celebrate an idea, a concept, a pastime, are really just being fleeced by so-called organizers who I think are very similar to what you used to call rock concert promoters. You know, They show up and then just ask for money. So that's disappointing because I had, you know, I've been to a number of those things and I had idealized the Midwest Gaming Classic, you know. In my mind, I said one of these days I'm going to go because it's in Wisconsin and there's no bad people in Wisconsin. At least that's what the media has led me to believe.
Not, you know what? Not that I've met. Like I felt very comfortable walking around the city there.
Now that was over in Brookfield, am I correct?
That's where it was originally. It was actually in downtown.
Milwaukee?
That place, Milwaukee. Thank you. It was in downtown Milwaukee, and I felt perfectly comfortable walking around that city.
Okay,
that's why I said it was a nice location. It was a different experience, and you were talking about the camaraderie of the people there, and there was none of that. Where the first, and it could be the fact that the first time I went to it, I was still on YouTube, and a lot of folks met us there. But I met up with a couple people from YouTube, and it was a different experience. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back to the whole idea that it was just less intimate. People didn't seem to be having as much fun. It was a transactional experience. I mean, everything there, you were giving something to get something.
See, then that's an interesting thing. Especially since it seems like a lot of it is based around they still call them panel discussions, but what they really are is kind of like a sort of a vaudeville routine mixed with a news program, it seems. And it's so those people can gain political power. That's just the way it seems to me anyway. And that's
I did not go to a single panel there.
Yeah, and then those are supposed to be the draw. At least that's what I'm led to believe. So
I don't know how much of a draw it was for this particular one, and that's kind of why I had hopes that it would still be a similar experience to our first visit, because they weren't really pushing the panels. I mean, they mentioned that there would be guests, but a lot of them you see them pushing the idea that, hey, come to see this person, like the Wizard World Comic-Cons. They're always putting the guests right out front, come to see this person. And with the Midwest Gaming Classic, like there was a list of people that were there, but it wasn't front and center. It wasn't, come and see this person. It was, oh, by the way, this guy that wrote this game back in 1982 is going to be here talking if you want to listen. And so it kind of gave me hope that it was still going to be that kind of experience. And it was, I don't know, maybe it's just me. But I mean, it was only a few years ago that we were there before, and it felt very different.
Well, I'm sure the change of location probably did that too. I mean, especially when large buildings, such monoliths as convention centers that are in major metropolitan areas, that's an intimidating structure. It's definitely more money than you have. So they did have they had a push for Polka button. So at the top of the escalator, you would go up and there was a button that said push for polka. You pushed it and it played polka music. I enjoyed that quite a bit. There was just a button on a platform?
There was a button at the top of the escalator. It was in this brass plate that said push for polka. And every time we went by, I pushed for polka.
See, I'm glad you did. Thank you very much because, I mean, number one, that's great use of tax dollars right there. But
I agree.
Not only that I think that lends credence to what I just said about there are no mean people in Wisconsin. Because,
you can't like polka and be mean.
Well, not only that, you can't dislike a polka button. Like, there's many buttons that do all sorts of terrible things. That's not one of them. So at the very least,
there was no fear in pushing the polka button.
See, and I appreciate, because there's buttons that cause fear. That's not,
If it's a big red...
Did you recognize the polka?
No, I actually didn't. Okay. I haven't listened to a lot of polka. I am a Weird Al Yankovic fan, but I didn't recognize that particular one, no.
Okay, because, the best one is always the beer barrel polka, and everybody knows that one. But that's just... I don't know, man. You're kind of selling me on it just with the polka button. I think that's reason enough to visit the Midwest Gaming Classic. But I guess you could go to the Milwaukee Convention Center, and they have it all the time, I would assume.
Sure, you could go there for something else. You could go there for the wrestling convention if there was ever one. So you don't have to go there for the Midwest Gaming Classic.
Yes.
I've never been to another gaming convention to compare it to. So it's really hard for me to judge whether you should or shouldn't go. But based on what I've heard other people say about conventions they've been to, it stacks up, I think, still favorably compared to most of those.
Well, it seems like a lot of them, and I won't name names, the people with the initials, it seems like that's more of an advertising opportunity than anything else. And other conventions and expos have taken suit and gone that route. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that, because I prefer advertising there as opposed to fucking Budweiser over my freeway, any old time. And when you live in Southern California, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
So, you're not allowed to have sky around here. I mean, you can't have water, you can't have air, and nor can you have sky. So there's that. But I don't know. I'm still hung up. But was it a big green button?
No, it was a simple black button in a brass plate set into the stone wall.
That's brilliant.
Most people would probably walk right by it and not notice, but I was immediately drawn to the word polka.
Well, see, now if I ever decide and ever manage to get over there to the Midwest Gaming Classic, that's on agenda, like line 1, subtitle A, polka button.
Yeah, you have to find it first.
Yeah, because when you go to these things, and that's another thing about going to these events, is you need to maximize your return. This is costing you a lot to get there. It's costing you a lot to stay there. And doing things like you said, you have to give to get. So you kind of want to maximize your return on that. And you have to have a plan. And, for me, always top of the list, play Tempest, play Paperboy. And then, eat food at some point. And try not to spend your life savings on a copy of Little Samson. Those are basically, your basic guidelines. But now for me, number 1A is the Polka Button.
Funny you mentioned that. So that, well, you probably remember that Tempest is my favorite arcade machine.
We had talked about that a little bit. There
was not a single Tempest arcade machine anywhere in this event. So maybe that shaded my opinion of it.
Well, and there's probably a very good reason for that, and we're going to dive into that in just a second, is talking about the maintenance of these machines, all those vector display monitors and everything.
Tempest is always broken.
Yes, because those machines are dying. Vector displays are really complicated, and to repair them, fuck it. You open one inside, like no, that's like trying to fix welfare. You just we can't do that. If you ever worked on an engine and you peel off the valve cover and there's nothing but black and green shit for miles, no, we can't fix this. This is beyond us.
If I can indulge for just a second.
Sure.
Most of my life I didn't have a whole lot of money, and my first car I bought was a 1980 or 81 Chevy Cavalier, and I blew the head gasket, and I didn't have any money to fix the thing. I took it in to have somebody check it. He's like, yeah, it's a blown head gasket. It'll be $1,200. Well, I think I paid $750 for the car. So then I went to an auto parts store and I looked up for the gasket itself, for the entire gasket kit, it was $35. So my very first car, I tore it down to the heads and then rebuilt the whole top end of the engine myself without ever having worked on a car before. And I had 3 leftover parts. And the only thing I couldn't do was set the timing. I had to take it to somebody and they charged me $50 to do the timing.
Yeah, because they have the gun.
And I had no idea how to set the timing.
Well, you didn't even know what timing was. You just thought it did that.
I didn't know. All I knew is I put it back together in mostly the same way I took it apart, and it wasn't working, and I couldn't figure out why. But yeah, my very first car, I tore it down to the heads and rebuilt the top end, having no idea.
How long did that car last?
You know what? After he fixed the timing, probably like another 2 years.
$35 can't go wrong.
Yeah, I actually took it and traded it in on a slightly newer, nicer car, and then that one broke down like 3 months later. So I should have kept the old Cavalier.
Maybe, and it seems like the ones a close cousin of the Cavalier, those Geo Storms. There's some of them still out there on the road.
So I don't think this would have still been on the road. It was pretty rusty, but it ran.
That rust, you know, back there in the Midwest, killing them automobiles, man. That really does it, because
it's terrible. I've gotten rid of more cars due to rust than anything else.
But speaking of machines falling apart, my good sir, not recently, I'm way behind in the program here because I realized I don't even think I've ever had you on this show for real. Have I?
Once, I believe. I
Once,
think I was
way
on here
back
once.
when, right?
You know what? Actually, twice. I was on here once by myself, and I think I was on here with Kid Shoryuken once.
Sure,
But I
that's
was having a
right.
hard time. I was having a hard time with my internet connection.
Not all that different
And
from this experience.
no, not a lot different.
No, that's
Although
okay.
I'm not sure it's me this time though. I
No,
don't
no,
know.
it could be me. It could be Google. It could be Skynet. We never know. But you know, I stopped showing the pornography in the backs, and that didn't seem to help. So we're gonna forge on through this as best we can. But
We'll blame the women upstairs. They're using all the internet.
that's exactly what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna blame the women, and that'll explain my position on Star Wars too. But we can talk about that some other time. What I want to talk about is that you are now in possession, or at least have been for some time, a Sega Turbo. Is that true?
Yes. From 1980.
Now, if you could just explain really quick what Sega Turbo is for the uninitiated.
There were a couple different versions of it. There was an upright cabinet that was very similar to Pole Position. Came out the year before Pole Position, and then there was a sit-down cabinet, again very similar to Pole Position, but it came out a year earlier. The difference, and I can't remember, did Pole Position have an analog pedal? It's been so long since I played an original Pole Position. Was it just on and off, or
You know
could
what?
you regulate speed with it?
I want to say it was no, it was simple. Well, I mean, it had some resistance to it, but I want to say it was just on off because now, mind you, most of my experience with Pole Position is a stand-up machine.
Yeah. So. Well, anyway, the cabinet I got was a sit-down cabinet, and the reason I asked that question is because I was very surprised to find out, like with Pole Position, you used to just shift into low and high in order to slow down or speed up and pass cars. This, you actually, if you try and do that with this cabinet, you will ultimately fail. It's not an analog pedal, but it is a 3-position pedal. So you actually accelerate as you push the pedal down. But other than that, it's very similar. The sit-down cabinet has a vertical monitor in it, and it's got some very interesting analog gauges. And man, I wish I could show you a picture of it. I wish I had it in the back here that I could show it to you, but I don't.
Well, I mean, but yeah. Have you shared it on your Facebook page?
I did. I shared a picture of it sitting in the back of my brother's truck.
Okay, well, if you don't mind, if you could shoot some photos, drop it on. You can find Ed EDT1138, Classic Gaming Enthusiast. Find him, find his page over there on Facebook. Go look. I know Facebook's terrible, but you know.
Oh no, don't do that. Don't find me. You don't want to find me. No.
Oh, maybe not then.
I never post anything.
Well, you know, it couldn't hurt, but hopefully Ed will share some photos and you can see this. Now, do the elemental, you know, the gauges, do they still work?
The only what my biggest disappointment in the cabinet is on the original, there is a gauge and it has a tach and a speedometer on it. And to help some of your audience, those who remember Knight Rider anyway, if you remember, he had the speedometer that it was just a series of lights that lit up as he went faster. It looks like that.
Like in a Ford Thunderbird?
Yeah, well, I've never been in one, but probably. It was broken, and I ended up replacing it with just a couple of simple light up gauges just to have something to look at in the empty space. But I'm trying to pull up the image here. But if you just put yourself in mind of a sit down Pole Position cabinet, it's like that, but a little bit larger. It was Sega. Well, I guess Pole Position was Atari's version of Turbo, I guess would be the better way to say it. Anything.
I guess that'd be a good way to look at it. But what I'm curious about is if you'll walk me through this process.
Sure.
How did you become aware that this machine was available, first and foremost?
I was driving home from work. Oh, there's the picture. And I was driving. I happened to take a shortcut through a neighborhood because I was trying to avoid traffic. And as I was driving, there's a garage sale, and sitting out in the yard was this cabinet. Let me see if I can download the image. View image. So I stopped, of course, because I'm interested. It didn't have a price on it. And I asked the gentleman, I asked his wife first if it was for sale. And she said, oh, absolutely. Let me get my husband and he'll give you a price. So he came out and you know what? I'm going to stop trying to save this picture while I'm talking because I'm bad at this. So anyway, he comes out and says, yeah, I've been having a heck of a time selling it. Nobody wants to haul the thing home. And he said, how about $50? And I said, well, if you're having a hard time selling it, how about 25? So I ended up getting the cabinet for $25. There we are. How would you like me to send this to you?
Huh?
Or am I able to share it somehow? I don't even know.
I don't even know if this works that way, unfortunately. But well, shoot it to me later, and I'll share it with the people who follow me on all this social media, and you can see this bitchin' thing for yourself. So you capitalized on another human being's misfortune, the American dream. I love it.
I did, and what makes it interesting is that he said, you know, I'll sell it to you for 25. Just don't tell my wife what I sold it to you for. Apparently, he had gotten it in an estate sale along with 3 other cabinets, and he told his wife that he wanted the. Is it called Baby Pac-Man? The one that is sort of like a mixture between an arcade and pinball?
Yes, sir. Baby Pac-Man.
He wanted the Baby Pac-Man for himself, and his idea was he was going to sell off the other 3 to make the money back. Well, he sold a Popeye cabinet, and I forget what the other one he told me was, but he couldn't sell this one. And he had it on Craigslist forever, and you know, people would come and look at it, and it's like, oh my God, that's huge. I can't take it. He had even sold it on eBay, I think, for $150, I believe is what he told me. But when the person came to pick it up, they said, oh, never mind. That's way too big. And so anyway, he had told his wife that he would definitely be able to sell them and make his money back. And he needed to sell this for a minimum of $150 to make his money, but nobody would take it. I am an idiot. So I got a few people to go with me and load the thing up. So that was how I got a hold of Sega Turbo. And everything worked on it marginally well. I had to do a few repairs, but nothing major.
Now, wow. Now, how many is a few? How many people did it take to load this mother?
Well, fortunately, it breaks in the middle. It's got a couple of bolts that holds it together, and then the base rides on rails. So you remove the 3 bolts out of the top, and then it'll slide apart on the bottom. There's a few wires with quick connects that you disconnect. So we were able to break it into 2. I took 3 people, and then the gentleman there was going to help me. But once we got it apart, really 2 people of just average strength could probably move it once it's broken into two pieces. It's not that bad, but it is fairly large. It's 6 foot long by almost 3 feet wide. And
how tall would you say?
It is, if I had to get, I keep looking back there like I'm going to see it. That's where it's going to go. I finally made room for it. So that's why all the lights are off, so you can't see the mess over there right now. It is at its tallest point. It's a little shorter in the front. I want to say it's probably about 4 feet tall, 48 to 52 inches, something like that. So not terribly tall. You have to sit down into it.
But even so, it's a good amount of wall space it's going to absorb.
Yeah, it's 6 foot of space. Basically, it's going to take up more space than 2 of my other cabinets. I had to do a fair bit of rearranging just to make room for it over there. But
it seems like it'll take up the same space as like 2 sofas.
You know what? It takes up roughly the same footprint as my air hockey table.
Wow.
It's a big machine. But when I started the idea of collecting arcade machines, I had a couple of wants. I wanted a stand-up arcade machine. I wanted a sit-down driving machine of some kind, and I wanted a cocktail arcade. So those were the 3 types of arcade machines I wanted. I wasn't real particular about what they were. I just wanted that experience because it was the 3 types of machines that I had played on as a kid. I'm sure there are other types of machines, but that's what I want. I wanted one of each, I guess.
Well, realistically, every other video game or arcade game as they're known today is kind of based on those 3 simple archetypes of.
Yeah, I really didn't think that through when I started saying that. So by the time I got to the end, I realized they're kind of all sit down, stand up, or cocktail. So
yeah, and so there you go. You've covered all your bases.
I wanted one of each.
Yeah, but see, now you're going to have a tough time arguing with, we won't say who, about well, you already have one of those. Well, this one's different.
It is different. Well, you know what? You know who took this surprisingly well.
That's another thing I'm impressed by. How did you tell?
You can say Amy. It's fine.
Okay.
My wife.
Yes. Mrs. T, how did you break this to her? Was this after you'd spent the $25?
Well, I had purchased it earlier in the day, and I had come home from work early, and gotten my, so I hadn't had an opportunity to actually talk to her about it yet.
Uh-huh.
So she didn't know about it until she got off work. And I called her and I said, I'm bringing something home. Don't be too upset. I promise it won't sit in the garage too long. And she rolled her eyes a little bit at me when she saw it on the back of the truck. But no, she took it very well. I
Okay.
thought for sure she was curious with me.
Ah, okay. And so, and now I assume you guys park your cars in the garage?
Yeah, my car is the one that sits out of the garage at the moment.
Okay. All right. So at least you get one. Because here in California, cars don't sit in garages anymore. Because the garage is full of shit. So apparently yours was not much different for a time. Now, how do you access the basement?
That is going to be, fortunately, the thing breaks into two pieces because the way you get into my basement, it's a split level, which I hate split levels, but here I am. And you have to come, we'll have to take it out of the garage in the front door. Then we'll have to go around a corner, down some stairs, then down. So we have to go down 2 sets of stairs to get down here.
So there's no outdoor access to the basement?
Not to this one, no.
Okay, that's interesting. You
have to navigate through the house. It will just fit through the basement door if I take the door off.
Right, well, naturally.
So once the door comes off, it will fit with about a ½ inch to spare.
See, that should be something that, the young men watching this program should understand. In order to achieve your dreams, you're going to have to remove some doors from their hinges. That's just the way it's going to be. You have to understand these things.
Yes, unfortunately, I had the wherewithal to measure the thing before I bought it off the guy. And I knew that it would just fit based on previous experience.
Oh, good. And what kind of shape is the cabinet in wood-wise?
Again, kind of wish you could say the structurally, it's in surprisingly good shape. The steering wheel, the way it is mounted, there's a sort of a plastic bezel that has the speedometer and the steering wheel mounted to it, and then of course a turbo gauge is mounted to it. But then behind the plastic bezel, the molded plastic bezel, they had just a piece of 1/4 inch Luan, and that's what the steering wheel was mounted to. So that piece of Luan was broken when I got it, and so the steering wheel would slide and move all over the place. So I had to get in there and repair that. There was no way to remove the Luan because it was like riveted to the plastic. And I tried drilling them out, and the plastic cracked and started breaking. So there was no way for me to replace the wood entirely. I had to just get in there and glue pieces of wood to sort of build up the support. So that was the most troubling thing to repair, is just reinforcing the steering wheel without replacing the entire bezel. Otherwise, there was damage on the bottom. And fortunately, the sides of the cabinet are actually elevated. I think I mentioned earlier on like a metal skid plate. So the wood on the sides of the cabinet had not been subjected to moisture on the ground. Like a lot of these older cabinets you get, the bottom few inches are all dry rotted, because they've gotten wet over the years and they rot and they come apart. This didn't suffer from that because of the way it's elevated. Now, they had wood that covered the rail, so you couldn't see the rail. And that was very badly dry rotted. But because of the location, I was able to cut it out and then reattach a new piece and then paint it black. And so structurally, it looks pretty good. The graphics, unfortunately, are rough. I mean, it's going on 40 years old now, and time has not treated it well. We went through, and there were a lot of scratches and gouges on it that you could see in the picture if you looked at it. And my daughter mixed paint up for me and tried to match a lot of the colors, and she did really well. We managed to match up the red and a couple of other colors, and then there's some really bizarre ones that no matter what she did, she couldn't quite match them up. So, but it's passable. As long as you're looking at it from about 10, 15 feet away, it looks great. Then you get
in a dark basement, I'm sure it's going to be just fine.
Well, it's not always dark. I mean, I do turn the lights on from time to time.
Well, but even so, lacking natural daylight, I'm sure it's going to look fantastic.
Well, I really didn't want to. Nobody sells graphics for it.
Sure.
I wasn't like you can't find them anywhere for this particular cabinet. And I don't know that I would have wanted to replace them anyway. I like the idea that it shows its age a little bit. Like there are some places in the paint where, I Love Joe, I think, is one of them that's scratched into it. There's no vulgarity, fortunately, but I love the idea that it's got those little touches on it where people have made their mark or written their name. Real small, unobtrusive, but I like the idea that it looks like it did when it was in the arcade.
I think that's so amazing that there's no profanity or pictures
Not a
of
single profane
balls.
word. Yeah, nothing like that. I was shocked.
Curses or see that's those were the days, man. That's when see that's just another time, another place. You showed me some pictures, and because we've been talking about this for a while, because the way you presented when you said that the wife was not upset is like, okay, that's amazing. So you're living the dream for a lot of us. But we start. I forget how our conversation began. I'm really prepared on this, obviously, but
you and me both.
Yeah, you were showing me. Well, there's a picture of the cherry on the cocktail cabinet, and oh gosh darn it. Well, we can go, and there's our discussion about Twister versus Dante's Peak, but that's for another program. And then it became a discussion of THX sound. But anyway, you showed me this picture, which I thought was really neat, and I don't think it's really going to show up on the camera here. But you have a coin meter. You're able to open the coin boxes. What was wrong with the coin box?
It had just been, you could tell that somebody who owned it previously didn't know that they just needed to drill the locks out. Mm-hmm. So somebody had taken a crowbar to it, trying to pry it open.
Oh, dear.
And I don't know if it was a matter of, happening back when it was in an arcade and somebody was trying to steal the money, or if it was just somebody trying to crank the thing open because they wanted access to it. But I drilled the locks out so I could remove the doors and kind of pound them flat because they were bowed pretty bad. And I wanted to repaint that area so it didn't rust. But when I got in there, I had mentioned to you that I wanted to see what the counter was on it, and it was a little lower than I had expected. And I found a couple of vaguely Asian-looking coins. I guess it'd be Oriental-looking coins. I don't know how that works. I don't know which is the right word to use.
Well, that's a very good point, because if this is from the early 1980s, then I'm pretty sure Oriental is completely passable.
Well, I mean, Oriental is when you're referring to a thing that they've made, yeah?
That derived from the Orient, correct.
Okay. Well, then I think that might be the right thing. However you want to take it, that's what it is.
Yeah, no, and now it didn't look, it was just very interesting, but it almost looked like a tribute to what an Asian or Oriental game token would look like.
I think I actually have, I don't know that you'll be able to see it on the stream because apparently my internet connection is real slow, but there is one right there. I don't know how well that shows up. Well, probably better if I had more light on it.
I'm cheating because I got it right here in front of me. But you showed me that the coin meter was a little bit low. Now, the coin meter was 63,639, which you said seemed low, and that kind of does. But assuming that's 25 cents per play, that comes out to $15,909. And
it only seemed low to me based on the numbers on my other machines. Because Zaxxon over there, I believe, is something like 700,000. I mean, it's high. And Super Cobra, I think, was in the 300,000 range. Now I would listen to the argument that Zaxxon was a more popular title, but Super Cobra, to my knowledge, was not a hugely popular title. I had never heard of it until I played it, I think, on the Atari 2600. So I don't think it was one that was significantly more popular. And then just the fact that this cabinet survived in working condition. I mean, unless it sat in somebody's collection for years, I would have thought it had been played a little bit more than that. But $15,000 is $15,000.
Well, something that we kind of waxed on a little bit was about how that game was very much, to me, a very much a tech demo. A lot of Sega games really are to show, because Sega was a lot of times in the arcade, especially, about their technical prowess, and I think that was an answer to the budding racing games of the time. And then Pole Position 2, I think, comes out in like 1983. So it might be reasonable to assume that many arcades who had something like that only had it until it stopped drawing money, and then they got Pole Position 2 or whatever racing game in it. But to think that it's suffered, and that might also be indicative of how there's no profanity or balls carved into it or anything like that, is that it might have just gone into a warehouse somewhere and sat for years.
Yeah,
And
possibly,
then,
or sat in this old man's collection before it went into his estate sale.
oh, entirely possible. Or it could have been, you know, estates are often, you know, stuff that the family was unable to sell in previous attempts too. So it might have been just something left over from whatever reason. But, and of course, a lot of, if it's set with a collector for any length of time, nobody puts fucking coins into a machine they own, you know, but it didn't seem to be modified for a Switch or anything, did it?
No. It definitely was still running the coin. Now, I will point out that my machines all take tokens. I make people put tokens in my machine.
Oh, really? Do you provide the tokens?
I do provide the tokens.
What do
I
you
don't
use
charge people for them. Actually, the Zaxxon machine that I got, Zaxxon and Super Cobra both had coin buckets filled with tokens when I got them. The previous owner had no idea they were even in there because he wasn't able to get the locks open.
You know, that was probably like an extra 10 or 12 pounds on each of those machines.
Yeah, he had drilled out the lock for the coin mechanism so that he could open the door and just flip the thing, but he had never gotten into the actual coin door itself and found the tokens in there. So I have a bunch of tokens that I'm assuming are, I mean, they look fairly old. There's no date on them, obviously, but I'm assuming they're original to those machines, whatever arcade they were in. It's the tokens from that arcade.
Oh, are they just the simple Eagle generic tokens?
No, it's 25 cents per play, I think is what it says. There's no, I don't remember there being a pattern on this. I think it just says 25 cents per play on each one.
That's interesting. That means, that might even go back to the times where you had to go see the man that had the change belt and he would count them out for you one at a time.
I like to think so. That's what I imagined when I saw it.
See, you got a piece of magic right there. That's really great. So to recap, you're only about $25 into the guy. Am I correct in that assumption?
Well, I'm $25 into the machine, but then I did buy, like I said, I bought a few things to make it look nicer. I bought some gauges to put on it just because the original turbo gauge had been broken.
Right.
So I bought like a turbo gauge off of Amazon just to put in there temporarily because it was the right size. And then I had to buy, like it uses the old dashboard bulbs behind the various lights and behind the marquee and everything. So I had to buy a number of those, but I'm maybe probably $55 or $60 all told into it, not including my daughter's paint and time.
Right. Well, slave labor is just a wonderful thing. That's how it built this country, you know.
Exactly right.
Right. Yes. And
except for the North.
Well, except for the North, but that's that's subjective. It depends
where
on
all the industry was.
Depends on how you look at the North and any. But we can have that discussion some other time. But I have to say that's fantastic. The wife didn't get pissed off, at least not yet, because it's you haven't taken it through the house yet, and who knows what could happen. But I have to say this: I am looking forward to a progress report. I hope to see where this leads after it's already in its position. And, if not recording a video of your own, if you'll come back on the program and tell everybody how it went, I'd really appreciate it.
I have to say you are far more interested in where this goes than I am. I've got it now. I'm happy.
No. This is one of my life's goals. I'm coming to that house. I am going to play that machine, and I'm also going to root through the tokens and obsess over that. So that's what we have to look forward to in the future right here. But anyway, that's all the time we have for the Yellkaos program. I want to thank everybody for stopping by and listening to Ed's Arcade Story, and hopefully have him on very soon right here on the program. Don't forget, check us both out on your social media, Facebook and all that crap. We thank you very much. And also remember that video games are good. It's the people that suck. Thank you very much. Good night.